figure before we started the regular show tonight, we just acknowledge at the top truly terrible stuff that happened over the 4th of July weekend. As of recording tonight on Tuesday, over 100 plus people have died from flooding in Kerrville in the greater Hill Country area. Just absolutely heartbreaking stuff. Would be heartbreaking stuff if it happened anywhere, but I find Hill Country and Kerrville and that whole area to be just one of the most beautiful things that Texas has to offer. I have told everyone out here who's kind of asked me about it, asked for my local color as a Texan about what happened there. Just that obviously it would be terrible if it happened anywhere, but truly beautiful part of Texas, and our thoughts and prayers are with the people who are going through really terrible stuff right now. And I'm going to, at the very top of this episode description, find a few, but not a complete list of many very great charities that you could give your money to support those who are going through the absolute unthinkable right now of losing a family member, losing a child, or just losing their home and their possessions. A lot of people are going through it right now, and definitely have to acknowledge the top here. We have the fortune of talking about, I think, very minor things in the grand scheme of things, but truly keep those people in Kerrville who have had an awful last week or so in your thoughts and prayers, and figure we couldn't leave with anything but talking about that. So we'll go the rest of the show here.
Here's Shed. Off the window, no. Roberts tried to get it. Shed for the win. Got it. Jamal Shed plays the hero again.
Back to pass. Donovan Smith. Smith steps up in the pocket, unloads it, throws it all the way downfield into the end zone. Tipped, and it is caught. Caught by the Cougars. Caught for a touchdown. Unbelievable. Caught by Stephon Johnson.
Stick it in your pipe and smoke it, baby. Yes!
Welcome to Scott Holm Podcast, off-season kind of episode. Tonight we got a number of, I would say, kind of bite-sized Cougar sports topics to talk about. Your typical off-season fare, maybe not enough to support an episode on its own, but certainly enough to talk about here as Bobby and I reconvene after a 4th of July off to record a podcast, because I would say the load-bearing topic tonight is a big one that I think we've been waiting for the kind of clear part of the offseason to really talk about. The clear part of the offseason and the legal resolution. That's the House versus NCAA case. We're going to dive into what that means for the University of Houston, U of H specific stuff, as well as some big picture stuff around that legislation. Obviously, a lot of bite-sized Cougar topics leading it tonight. Bobby, did you have a good 4th of July weekend?
I did, man. You know, when you work in retail, it's a work weekend for me. I think you and I had the joke. You send me that video of the governor on of a guy who closes up his warehouse, a British guy who closes up his warehouse.
Tom Skinner, by the way, on TikTok, absolutely just a British guy who does kind of like motivational stuff. He has my favorite TikTok like leading into the weekend.
Yeah, you know, I got to watch you enjoy your 3-day weekend playing that, and I'm currently living mine. So super excited. Just for anybody who's listening to this, you're probably listening tomorrow, and I will be at Big 12 Media Days tomorrow for that, or today, whenever you're listening. Wednesday, the 9th, I will be at Big 12 Media Days for the University of Houston section. I'm going to be getting some cool audio from Coach Fritz, from other coaches who are there. Figure if I'm going to be there, I might as well listen to a couple of press conferences and maybe ask a couple of U of H related questions or 90s Cowboys related questions to Deion Sanders.
No doubt. I was going to also mention our Patreon, patreon.com/shpodcast. Specific to that is that the tail end of tonight's episode will give you a little bit of a taste of a patron exclusive episode that Bobby and I are doing in depth, diving into the 2025 football transfer portal class. If any of that sounds interesting to you, you want a little taste at the end, we will give that to you. But if you'd like to support the work that Bobby and I do here on a weekly basis, please go to patreon.com/shpodcast. We're going to lead with a little Cougar men's basketball news tonight, kind of an annual topic. And I didn't really think about it until now, Bobby, but both of the topics actually do kind of center around Vegas in their own way. We'll start with the news about the U of H men's basketball season to come. We did find out in the last couple of weeks the opponents and times. The first 2 games the Cougars will be playing at the Players Era event on Thanksgiving week out in Las Vegas. Cougs will open on Monday, November 24th against Syracuse at 5 Central, and then play Tennessee the following day, Tuesday, November 25th, also at 5 Central. And the third game on the 26th will be determined by how the Cougs do in the first two, but your full list of possible opponents here is Rutgers, Creighton, Notre Dame, St. John's, Iowa State, Oregon, Auburn, Alabama, Gonzaga, Michigan, Deep Breath, San Diego State, Maryland, Kansas, Baylor, or UNLV. Bobby, out of that list that I just read, total gut reaction, who would you like opponent number 3 to be?
Oh man, that's tough because you got two tough games with Tennessee and Syracuse already. And you're hoping you win those, obviously. So now the next question is, would you rather have like an easy game to kind of drop off there and maybe get a little bit of a break? Or do you want somebody like St. John's, right? St. John's, who won the Big East this past year, looks to be a top 5 team heading into the season. This tournament has gotten crazy in year 2. So yeah, it kind of boils down to that. I think I'd like to see, I think Gonzaga was on the list. I think Gonzaga is probably the team that I want just for that name, a school that's really, that's going to be really fun. I like playing them. It'll get people excited to see Houston versus Gonzaga. Also, again, I mentioned St. John's, not one that you want to say you wouldn't want to play there either. Again, I think it really depends on how you do against the first two teams, right? If you go 0-2 there, you might want somebody like a St. John's who can maybe help with the RPI a little bit, and won't hurt you as much. But also there's that aspect of getting that quote unquote easy win there. But in this tournament, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of quote easy wins here.
My answer is going to be St. John's for the most obvious reason that would mean that U of H likely did pretty well in its first 2 games, but it would give some really compelling late November basketball. And even in an event like this one that's stacked with pretty good programs, I think that's your theoretical best matchup among the full players at our field. You make a good point for the, hey, at 0-2, you might want to like salvage something out of this tournament. Like make a good case for it. Nothing that I could argue against there. If we're 0-2, I'm almost kind of hoping for UNLV in year 1 under Josh Pastner. And we're like, let's just leave Vegas
for old time's sakes.
Let's just leave Vegas with 1 win here, okay?
Yeah.
Like, quick stuff on the teams that are actually confirmed. This is going to be an in-depth preview, but just if you're listening, you're like, how good does Syracuse and Tennessee look for the coming year? Syracuse was unconscionably bad last year compared to at least the level of, I think, Orange basketball that we've been kind of used to most of our lives. They were 14-19 overall, and they were one of the worst teams in a really bad iteration of AAC basketball. It really does feel like their coach, Adrian Autry, is in kind of a make or break year 3 after succeeding Jim Boeheim. They do bring in 2 blue chip high school recruits, Sadiq White Jr. and son of Carmelo Anthony, Keon Anthony. Don't know if I'm mispronouncing his name. Both top 30-ish recruits. So it's not just, it's Carmelo Anthony's son. And it's like, he's a 3-star. Legitimately very big prospect here. They brought in a ton of transfers, but other than Nathan George, who led the ACC in assists per game in Georgia Tech last year, none of those guys really stand out to me. I think one that U of H should be a pretty decent-sized favorite in. Don't need to tell Cougar fans listening where Tennessee's most recent season ended, but even not knowing anything about their roster beyond, guys coming in, I think the Vols should probably be a better opponent than Syracuse. They do have to replace a number of key veteran guys that we saw last time. Zakai Ziegler, Chaz Lanier, Jordan Gainey, who was, I think, one of the few guys who had a really good game against the Cougars, Igor Milicic and Jemai Meshak, who were all either starters or critical rotation guys last season, but they did bring in one of the top guys in the portal, Jacoby Gillespie, previously of Maryland, along with, I would say, the top uncommitted until recently high school recruit Nate Ament, who is the number 4 player in this current senior class. Just by virtue, I think, of not having a preseason top 5 team like Bama on the slate, this is going to be an easier start than you got at last year's Players Era. But I think interesting early tests, these two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, it's not Alabama last year, but I think these are the kind of games that will help you determine and will help the resume what kind of team you might actually see from the Cougs.
Definitely like that the hardest of the 2 games we know is second.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'd prefer not to lead with it because like Tennessee's gonna be really good. Even not knowing a lot about them, pretty confident that's a top 10-ish kind of team. And that you're leading a little bit softer landing with Syracuse, even if Syracuse is a decent bit better. But we also had some Cougar men's basketball alumni related news from the past week or so. Not really surprised. We didn't see any Cougar players selected in the 2 rounds of the most recent NBA draft, but we did find out there will be a number of Cougars playing at the NBA Summer League this month, mostly in Vegas. So they've had some early games in Salt Lake City in the Bay Area to start here at the beginning of July. We found out who'd be playing with who. LJ Cryer and Javier Francis, who have already played some for the Golden State Warriors. Cryer had 19 and Francis had, I believe, 10 points and 7 boards. That's just off the top of my head. On Sunday in one of the Warriors' early Summer League games, we also found out that Jaywan Roberts will be playing for the Utah Jazz, Nate Hinton for the Memphis Grizzlies, and Jamal Shed will once again be on the Toronto Raptors Summer League team after playing all regular season with them. I think that's all of them, Bobby.
I think that's all I got too.
But if I missed one, yeah. I have 2 games that I have circled in the next week or so, plan on being in attendance for. This coming Sunday, the Warriors and Jazz will face off at the Thomas and Mack Center, and then the following Thursday, the 17th, the Warriors will have their final Vegas Summer League game against Jamal Shed and the Raptors at Cox Pavilion, which is the slightly smaller arena adjacent to Thomas and Mack. Been to Summer League every season since I moved out here 5-ish years ago. Definitely excited to see some Cougar alums competing out here in the flesh, and it was really cool to see LJ and Javier have nice little opening games for the Warriors.
Yeah, I think, it just kind of started, not that I'm a huge follower of Utah Summer League or anything like that, but, it started blowing up a little bit on social media. LJ Cryer, 15 in the first half of their game, ended up with 19. You see the same with Wani, 10 and 7 to what you said in 16 minutes. Just shout out Nate Hinton as well. Didn't do a ton, but just kind of showing the things that you expect from a Kelvin Sampson type player. Getting some rebounds, mostly offensive, hitting the boards, doing everything that you want to see there. So LJ Cryer, like I said, looks like he may be playing himself onto an NBA roster, if not on an NBA roster, at least a G League roster. And if for some reason he doesn't manage to land in the G League, I think you and I were talking about it, that he is probably going to end up okay playing somewhere just because of that 3-point shot, even if it is overseas.
Yeah, just one Summer League game, but he kind of showed it off. Like, even if there are other things that maybe aren't at NBA level, but if you could shoot the ball like LJ Cryer shoots the ball and do all the toughness stuff that he's willing to do, that we saw him do in college as part of the Kelvin Sampson program, like, this guy's a professional baller. This guy's got a professional future, and it was nice to see the start of that this weekend, and excited to see it here in person and hopefully not too long.
Yep.
And we had the most recent hire at U of H, the head coaching department, softball's Chrissy Schoonmaker, in the past couple weeks hired her first assistant coaches. So just mention that here quickly. I'm at least marginally more optimistic about Cougar softball after seeing her first hire, Jeff Cottrell, as an assistant. Most recently was an assistant coach at Mizzou and was on the staff when the Tigers went to the Supers and the NCAA tournament in 2024. Before that, he was a longtime assistant at the Oklahoma State Cowgirl softball program under their super successful current head coach, Kenny Gashevsky, which really stood out to me. He was there from day one at OSU, and the Cowgirls went from kind of being a Big 12 also-ran to a multi-time Women's College World Series program. While he was there, oversaw hitting for seasons when OSU hit very well, stepped in as their pitching coach, filling in for a colleague who had to take a health leave, and call pitches for multiple seasons for one of the Big 12's better pitchers in recent history, Samantha Shao. Didn't do so great his last year at Mizzou. Like, there's a reason why Jeff Cottrell is available to be hired here. I think any assistant that U of H was going to be in the market for either would be unproven at this level or would probably be coming off a season that allowed them to be not currently gainfully employed. But I don't think it's also unfair to any recent assistants that Vesley's had in this program to say Jeff Cottrell is a good deal more qualified than anyone that Kristen Vesley had here the past 5 or 6 seasons. And I've had that confirmed by people who know softball a bit better than me.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled with the hire. I think you and I are coming at this a little bit differently. I think, to your point, he's had some decent, or he's had some good teams.
He had some decent teams that went to the last stage of the sport.
But those aren't necessarily his teams, right? He's the assistant on them, on wildly successful programs that have had a ton of success. And he's coached under some really great names, which I think is great. But he was also let go from his last position. Missouri was dead last in batting average in the SEC. They were 5th in slugging, which I think or in home runs, I think. I don't know why I'm getting confused there. Which I think is good. I think that's solid. It doesn't give me the warm and fuzzies like, oh yeah, this is the best hire ever or anything like that. I think
Do you think we're making the best hire ever? Do you think that was going to happen at this program?
No, I didn't think that it was, but I don't think our expectations should be like, well, the last coach didn't do a very good job, and this is a little bit better than any of the assistants they hired. Like, I would still like to see just because you went from really bad to bad, in my opinion, doesn't make it good. It means it is a step forward, but it doesn't mean that I think the expectations I think I had were, I personally would have preferred somebody young, kind of upcoming, somebody who doesn't have the track record that quite Cottrell does, just to see and learn along those lines. That's just me here. We said the same thing about baseball. I think when I texted you, hey, always good when we hired a baseball assistant, I said, always good to get an assistant from an SEC job, a baseball. And you were like, yeah, he was available because he got fired. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
I came on here like 3 days later, and I was like, I think that initial assessment was unfair. I think Chesborough, the guy in question here, was actually more he's of the two assistants baseball hired. I think the guy actually has a decent track record. I don't think it's going to change anything for that program, but I don't know. I think you're being kind of harsh on the guy, but
yeah, I'm not saying it's necessary. I'm not just saying that like, oh, this is bad and this couldn't work whatsoever. You know, he's got a bad, horrible track record. I just think when you got him away from one of the more premier blue blood names in the country, he got fired. That's my only kind of thing with that is like, I mean, we've had successful assistants, or we've had assistants who were good at places like OU and other blue. Our last head coach, right, was a player at OU and was around a very successful program and just didn't do very good away from that program. And it looked like Cottrell, kind of the same, just kind of on a base kind of look, is he was really successful at a program that's really successful all the time. And they didn't have a huge drop up when he left. So that's my only thing on it. I'm not saying that it's necessarily this terrible hire. I'm just not as high on it as you are, just because when you got him away from a blue blood program, he ended up losing.
Mizzou's not blue blood. Mizzou's not a softball blue blood.
No, I'm saying
it's blue blood conference, but that's not.
No, I'm saying Oklahoma State. When you got him away from Oklahoma State into Missouri, he ended up getting fired.
He was also a part of Oklahoma State. He came to Oklahoma State when they were one of the Big 12's worst programs, and was part of them becoming one of the Big 12's best programs.
That's fair.
Like he didn't arrive there in the middle of them being like a superstar program. Was he like 100% responsible for every improvement they did? Like, no, but I think you could also look at the years he was there and be like, oh yeah, like he oversaw some really good stuff they did there during that time. Anyway,
I'm not saying he didn't do good stuff while he was at Oklahoma State, right? Like obviously he did. You can see that, but I raise up a couple of question marks because when he left Oklahoma State, it didn't go well.
And Schoonmaker also hired one of her assistant coaches who was previously at GW, Jordan Gontram, who was on the GW staff the past 2 seasons where she was the Revolutionaries hitting coach and coached outfielders. 2024 GW is by most metrics the best offensive team in the A10 conference, but I would say also not like wild about the resume. Gontram was playing until the 2022 season, so still fairly young. I would a lot of the stuff you just said about this coach, I'd be like, I don't know if I'm too wild about hiring an assistant who didn't oversee necessarily the best things that George Washington softball did while she was there. But I also figured that Schoonmaker would be bringing at least one of her assistants. I think what's going to color a lot of how I feel about the staff is if Schoonmaker hires a third assistant coach. Vesley had 3 assistants on staff this most recent season, but I'm also not being too uncharitable to these assistants that they were all pretty low on experience coaching college softball and probably didn't command a huge salary. So I'll be curious whether Schoonmaker has the pool to hire a third assistant, and if she hires a third assistant who I think has like a pretty credible pitching coach background, I'll feel pretty good about the staff. But if Cottrell's here to be the pitching coach, something he did a decent job as a fill-in previously. If we're hiring him just based on 2 years coaching a pretty good pitcher in the past, that must start sounding a lot like you did about that, and our hitting coach being someone who, with all due respect, has less than 3 years at the Division I level. But I think also the hire was largely made because U of H wasn't going to commit a ton of dollars this program, and yeah, the staff, at least in some part, kind of looks like that.
Yeah, and I think with Gontram, it really, for me, felt like somebody she brought over as kind of a culture. Hey, this is somebody who's going to help me. I'm comfortable with this person. She's young. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of instructional things that she'll be doing, or if she's going to be more of a recruiting and more like a game strategy kind of person in that kind of sense. I definitely would be concerned if we had these two assistants only, and one was a pitching coach and one was just a hitting coach. D1 softball has us listed with the 3 assistants, like you said. I'm still waiting on one to be filled. It's starting to it feels a little late because the season's been over a little bit, but there's a lot of empty spots on D1 softball assistant coaching tracker if you've ever taken a look. So clearly, I don't know a ton about the D1 softball coaching carousel. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm an expert on it. Looks like there's a lot of open positions still to be filled.
Yeah, no doubt. A little bit, I think, more positive vibes. You have a bit of an off-season golf update for us, do you not?
I do, sir. I do. It's been a very, very interesting golf season, off season so far. Excuse me. Are we doing no intro? Cool. I'll give it a break here so you know where I just asked that question. All right, so I'm going to go pretty quick through this. We have some Cougars who have participated in amateur tournaments, 1 professional tournament, maybe 2 professional tournaments, because one's really hard to find some info on. So let me just go over that with you. Malin Kim wins the Southern Amateur. It's not the most prestigious tournament. This doesn't get her into like the Women's US Open or anything like that. It's still a good tournament. It's always good to win, right? One of the things that impressed me the most in it is Malin Kim made her way through through knockout stages in kind of a tournament format like that, rather than just regular stroke play. And that's how NCAA championships are decided once you get to the final matches. Not that I necessarily think the Cougs are going to do that, but that is always a talent that you would rather your team have. You'd also rather win tournaments that you enter rather than lose them. So that's pretty good there. You also have Natalie St. Germain. She won the Czech Open Golf Tour. I tried to do a lot of research on this. Hard to find out much about this tournament. Anything I did find was in Czech. I didn't know what I was reading. I tried to Google Translate it. It didn't make sense.
Too many C's and Z's.
Yeah, I tried, guys. I really tried. This took like 30 minutes of me like typing in her name. I tried to copy and paste. It was a disaster. But again, you'd rather win tournaments you enter than not win tournaments you enter. So always good there. And then I would say probably the biggest tournament that anyone on the women's golf team has participated in was the RNA Women's Amateur. That would be like the U.S. Amateur. That's a huge tournament to enter. You also had Alexis Saldana in it, as well as Yates also competed in it. Mo was the only one who made it to the match play tournament. She was eliminated in the first round, but she was probably in the top 25 finishers. Lost in the match play portion of the tournament, but lost in extra holes. Really close match. So really, really great showing from Moa there. One to be excited about if you are a Houston Cougar fan. And then finally, two more. You have Cougar signee, so an incoming freshman. Sadie Adams won the English women's stroke play. So basically, all the English golfers go in. She won. It was stroke play, so there was no match play at the end. It was just low score. Actually birdied 5 of the final 6 holes to win the tournament. Just absolute clutch. Ice water in her veins. Love to see that as well. And then the final golf note is Wolfgang Glow actually played in the DP World Tour event, which is the European Tour. So a professional event, finished second among the amateurs. Shot even par, missed the cut by 3, but really good performance from him. Happy to see him get some experience in a professional tournament. Super exciting. Great recruiting tool if we're tying it back to the Cougs. Great recruiting tool. Look, you can come, you can play, and during the offseason, we're going to work to get you in some professional tournaments.
Nice. And we have one more offseason topic here. Not really breaking news here that Antoine Jean was really, really good in the 2025 Cougar baseball season, but he now has a long list of postseason awards to confirm what we've been saying on this pod for the better part of the last 4 months. As of last week, Jean was named an All-American by 6 different publications as the first pitcher in this program since Brad Lincoln to be named a first-team All-American by multiple outlets. And that's not for lack of really good pitchers in the 19 years since Lincoln's last season. In this most recent one, I think it really puts Jean in rarefied air. If you're younger and not aware, Brad Lincoln ended up being a top 5 draft pick, threw over 200 innings for multiple teams in the MLB. Really good pitcher. And then that's the company Antoine Jean is in here. I'm not going to list every single one of these 6 publications out, but it did catch my eye that D1 Baseball gave Jean first team All-American honors. In my opinion, doing that as the largest outlet solely dedicated to the sport really caught my eye. Obviously, don't think Jean's getting drafted top 5 here because of his age and injury history prior to the most recent seasons that he's played here at U of H when the MLB draft starts on Sunday. But I also don't think as a lefty with proven high-end swing and miss stuff that he's going to have to wait too long to get picked by a team, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye over that way in just a week's time. Related to this topic, Bobby, can I admit something here?
Yep.
If I could go back and change my vote, I would have picked Antoine Jean for Cougar Male Athlete of the Year in last episode's Poskers. I believe that was last episode. Was that 2 episodes ago or last episode?
No, that was it. That was
the whole week
believe.
off kind of throws me off there. Love LJ Cryer and not in any way trying to retroactively take away LJ Cryer and all the reasons that, maybe you want to vote for him. But now that I've had some time to reflect on it, really as I was putting my thoughts together for this topic, the more I realized what an unbelievable, almost unprecedented in the last 20 years kind of season Antoine Jean had for Cougar baseball. And it was nice to see some of the folks that cover the sport really recognize it there.
Yeah, just I think I tried to scream it from the rooftops last week. Just like, this is one of the, again, I've said this probably 5 times on this podcast, but if this team went to a regional, people would call him one of, if not the best pitchers we've seen since you and I became fans.
So our main topic tonight is probably the biggest development in college sports since about 4 years ago, the start of college athletes being able to benefit financially from their name, image, and likeness, or it's more commonly known by its shorthand, NIL. And that's the settlement of the House v. NCAA court case, which dramatically changes how NCAA athletes and schools can compensate those athletes. Bobby, if you allow me, can I do a quick summary for the listeners?
Have at it, buddy.
I want to start by saying I know there are at least a few lawyers or law-adjacent people who listen to our humble podcast, so please accept our apologies here as non-lawyers who are going to attempt, to talk about this and hopefully not mess up any of the finer points of, the law or generally the lawyerly profession in our subsequent talk here. But this was a lawsuit filed against the NCAA very shortly after a previous similar case, Alston v. NCAA, in 2020. It was filed by UT Austin swimmer Grant House, the namesake House there, and Oregon basketball player at the time, Sedona Prince. House and Prince were suing for name, image, and likeness damages. And for the NCAA and at the time, the power conferences, the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and Pac-12, suing them for name, image, and likeness damages and an injunction to force the NCAA and those named conferences here to lift restrictions, sharing revenue from their previously very lucrative broadcast deals that these conferences had. Ultimately, it was in the interest of the NCAA and these conferences to settle for even a really large sum, ended up being $2.8 billion, because a loss in a court case would have exposed the NCAA and these conferences to magnitudes more in damages. So, like I said a second ago, these schools opted into an approximately $2.8 billion settlement, which allows these opted-in institutions, which go beyond just the schools in the Power 5 conferences, to pay as much as, but not more than $20.5 million collectively directly to their student athletes, I think starting about a week ago, July 1st. Yeah, it's been exactly a week ago from today. Previously, besides, I think, Alston payments, which Dustin and I discussed in passing on the show, schools could not give any kind of direct compensation to athletes outside their scholarships. This case and Alston were also related to O'Bannon v. NCAA, a 2014 case that kind of opened the door for the developments we've had in college athletes not being restricted on making money off of their name, image, and likeness. You might remember the O'Bannon case being the one that led to a long gap of the NCAA football game not happening because players there wasn't an agreement at the time on how players could benefit from their name, image, and likeness, but we couldn't have the players' likeness in the game. Anyway, to get this back on track, I think one of the biggest aspects of the settlement is how it affects NIL dealings going forward, and we're going to discuss that because it changes it, I think, pretty drastically. U of H, in their role in this, I think it's where we should lead off. U of H has been pretty clear, Eddie Nunez, on the record in the public domain, that the school intends to pay the full maximum allowed $20.5 million to student athletes, and that's where we're going to start. U of H's role in this as a U of H focused podcast. I thought this would be a fun kind of two-part question for us to kick around, and the first part I kind of wanted your genuine gut reaction on. But we had to kind of suss this out beforehand, so you kind of know what's coming here. But let's say you, Bobby, you're the NIL czar here. That's my word for it. You have final say on who gets what in terms of U of H's $20.5 million. Which program are you funding at slightly higher than kind of their national average? And after that, what is your full breakdown of who gets what?
So I'm going to kind of flip it just a little bit to kind of get you, because I want to ask you as well.
Sure.
So my whole thought is you're getting 20.5, right?
Yep.
And you're going to, so football, basketball men's basketball are going to be your primary two. I think that's going to be the case with most schools that field every sport. So 15 for football feels like too much, right? 15 feels like it's too much for football.
I assume you're saying million?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, million. 15 million feels like too much for football because that gives you 5.5 to go with everyone else, and that just doesn't feel like enough for everyone else. But 10 doesn't feel like it gets the job done, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking like 12.5 for football. That feels right. That gives you about 8 left if my math's right. Or 20 minus 12. Yeah, 8. That gives you about 8 million left. I'm thinking 5 for basketball. 5 million for basketball. Roster's about 12. The rough math there equals like 475 a student, a player. That feels about right. You know, obviously your higher end guys, your LJ Cryers, your Wani Robert, the guys who they're going to make more than that, but the lower end, the back end of your roster isn't going to make as much. So 5 million feels about right for basketball. That leaves about, what's my math there? 3 million for a fourth in all the different programs. I think U of H is going to go with 3 big programs: football, basketball, and then the discussion happens on the third one. And I really have it boiled down to three options for U of H that I think might work: women's basketball, volleyball, or baseball. And I think one of those 3 sports gets $2 million. And kind of thinking about it, women's basketball, I feel like that would be a good investment. The problem is you're going to get schools like UConn, you're going to get schools like South Carolina that are going to throw a lot of money at women's basketball because that's kind of what they do, right? That's kind of their bread and butter, right? They're gonna run into the same problems we are, but I could see like South Carolina's women's basketball team making more than their men's basketball team. Like, as crazy as that may sound to some people, like I could see something like that happening. So it's going to be really hard. I don't know if your dollar goes as far with women's basketball. The second one is baseball. I think we already have facilities if you invest in some players, but schools like Vanderbilt, right? Vanderbilt's going to go all in with it, with baseball. The SEC is going to do that. Some of their lower football schools are going to kind of do that Mississippi State, you could really see the Bulldogs going hard in with the house case. So does your money go as far there? I think it's beneficial where we're located. We got a lot of talent around us. I know you and I don't always love when people want to talk about the whole big grand scheme of we need to build a fence around Houston when it comes to a bunch of other sports. So that leaves me with volleyball, and I think you're going to run into a school like Nebraska, other schools that pay a lot of money and pay a lot of attention to volleyball. But I think you have an opportunity, and I think $2 million would go a very, very, very long way with volleyball. So I think I may go with volleyball here, having thought about it. I think the best bang for the buck is going to be there, but you're severely going to hamper a program like baseball because there's going to be a lot of schools that are offering a lot of money for it. So I think it's up to U of H to kind of decide what that third sport's going to be. What I don't like to call it obscure sport, but what sport are we going to want to just throw kind of crazy money at and then leave another million and a half for everyone else? So Sam, what would you think that funding over the national average? And if anything I said, if you disagree with, I'd love to hear your take on that.
I think we were fairly close on our football and men's basketball numbers. I wouldn't really disagree there. I would say I wouldn't even call it pushback. My only counter to some things you said, I mean, like, yeah, SEC baseball programs are going to spend more than us. UConn and South Carolina are going to spend more in baseball. UConn and South Carolina are going to spend more than us in women's basketball. You're not competing against those schools. Like, you're not going to be a top 5 program. Like, you're simply just trying to not be, in the case of women's basketball, not laughably bad, because that's what you were last year and fairly close to it the year before. And the league leaves you, the new league being a lot tougher in the sport, leaves you a lot more exposed there. My sport that I had, so I split mine into 5 sports here. I had football getting 65%, which comes out to 13.3 million. I'm probably lower than where we're going, but for this thought exercise, I don't think I was wildly unrealistic. I gave men's hoops 23%. We were pretty close on that. I have 4.7 million. I think your number was 5 million there specifically. Women's hoops was my third one. Yes, and they would be getting just over 1 million in this case, 5%. And that's not a huge amount. That's not putting you in competition with UConn, South Carolina, the preeminent women's basketball powers, but that's probably not where you're going to be unless like your fan base steps up in a much larger way. I think giving them just over $1 million, I think gives your women's basketball program a fighting chance in a good league. I think it gives you a chance to be a respectable team, not rooted to the bottom of the standings, which is kind of where you've been these last 2 seasons, and kind of that was your short-term outlook. And we were kind of pessimistic in the immediate time before they hired Matthew Mitchell as the coach there. I feel like you hire a new head coach who's an insanely proven winner, even with a few years out of the game, the exact kind of head coach who can revitalize interest from the fan base at large. I think you need to give him something like that 1 million. Didn't ignore volleyball here. Volleyball will get 4% a year, 820,000. Doesn't put you with Nebraska. Doesn't put you with Pitt. Name your elite volleyball program here. Purdue, etc. I still think it gives a coach in David Rare who's shown you can build an NCAA level team here a chance to do that again, a chance to compete in a good Big 12 program. I think, and my 5th sport is the one I think that would be my answer to the one over average. I picked Cougar track and field. I gave them my remaining 3%, which comes out to 615,000 there, because it's a sport where U of H has this incredible history, led by 2 alums who devoted big chunks of their life to their alma mater, and Will Blackburn and Carl Lewis. But I think above all else, the reason why I made track and field this 5th program to go along with the 4 I've just mentioned previously is that's the closest, at least on the men's side right now, to being a national title contender outside of men's basketball. And being able to give that program that extra push, to me, I think is the best value proposition in U of H athletics right now. If you're looking at fewest dollars needed to get this team competing for national titles, I think that's Cougar track and field. Like, would I give them 3-4 million? No, I think that leaves you exposed in other areas. And it's as we've both, I think, pointed out, it's going to be not a huge slice of the pie that isn't going to football and men's basketball. There's a decent chance, I don't think we're wildly underestimating it, but there's a decent chance that both you and I, at differing degrees, are somewhat underestimating what U of H is going to throw at football just because of the significance of football at a Texas university.
Yeah, I think, as I thought about this, the more I thought about, like, I think if this is 2012, 2010, you're in a Keenum era and you're in a James Dickey era basketball. I think if we hadn't had the success, I think football absolutely, we are spreading money much differently in that era, but now we've seen the success with basketball and we don't want to go back. So I think football is going to play a large role, and I wouldn't be surprised if you are right and we see some pushback from that, and watch it and watch it grow and how much they're going to get, because we are a university in the state of Texas. It will always be the number one sport, no matter what the basketball program does. Everyone's going to get more excited about football for whatever reason. So yeah, I could see us throwing more money in that sense at football. But I wanted to make sure when I did mine. So I have my 3 sports, but I think my 4th is leaving $1 million for all the other sports. I do wonder how much we're going to see any kind of trickle down. What does our 2 favorite programs, golf and tennis, get, if anything, right? What does swimming and diving? What does
that's why I completely forgot. Yeah.
What do those programs get? Because if that's why I wanted to leave a little bit for them, because I think there's going to be some for a lot of the programs that you might call non-revenue. I think
Olympic sports.
Calls them Olympic sports. So I that to me is one of the more curious things about what's going to happen with House is, what do other sports look like, and what do universities decide to spend their money on?
Can I be like really not to you, not to the listeners? Can I be really mean for a second, like related to this topic?
Yeah, of course.
I wouldn't give baseball a fucking cent.
Yeah,
Todd Whitting should be happy he has I'm not trying to be a dick here, but he should be happy he has a job. You're a great fundraiser. You're obviously a lot better fundraiser than you are putting a NCAA baseball program in the field. We let you keep your job when basically every other power conference program would have fired you. You got to make this up, man. Like, it's taking even a small amount of money from like the golf programs and swimming and diving, who are actually proven winners to differing degrees in their sports, and giving it to a baseball program that has rarely been better than the bottom part of multiple different leagues these last 6 years. To me, it's a non-start. And I know it's harsh to say, I wouldn't give them anything, but I'm not saying I think that's going to be the reality. I wouldn't allocate them a cent.
Yeah,
it's for the coming season, not ever. Like,
and to me, that's where things get a little bit more complicated, because once you like, if you're not allocating anything to baseball this year, right? Who do you then take it from when you get a new coach and you want to start allocating things? Who do you then steal from, right? Because do you then take a 1.5 away from basketball? Like, do you take some from football? Like that's one of the interesting things about House with me, is you have a salary cap for your entire athletic program. And it's just, and I think, I was talking to a coach, I won't say which one, but I was talking to a coach about their program. And one of the things they said is, the cost for us to get a top tier recruit is almost double what it would be for a program that has better facilities for this program, because those are the things that recruits in this sport are curious about. And when they go to one versus they come to U of H. So can U of H, the fans, we talk about the fan support, can we as fans give the money back to facilities so that now it's cheaper for us to get a top tier player in a Olympic sport? What does that look like, right? Instead of donating to NIL, do we now donate to a new tennis facility? Do we donate to a new track and field facility? Do we donate to a new soccer facility to make it cheaper for us to get top tier recruits? Is that how programs go back to on a national level, right? But as on a U of H aspect, is that how programs go back to getting players on their teams for less money?
No, you're right. I don't have a good answer for because no one wants a pay cut, no one likes a budget cut in their program. And if none of the programs that I had giving stuff are now being like, oh, we got to give this up because we got a new baseball coach, you're going to cut it from Kelvin Sampson's budget.
Right.
You're probably not going to cut from football because even at a higher number than you and I are putting there, I would venture to guess U of H will be funding football at a lower percentage than a good number of its Big 12 counterparts. Where's the money come from? And it's a good point, and not one I have a good retort to.
Yeah. So, I think one of the most interesting things about House is just how it's going to just like kind of change college sports. Sam, I know you had listened and we're kind of bouncing some ideas. I'd love to get what your perspective on what it's going to look like when we go nationwide with this. Cause, we were listening, you and I listened to a lot of the same college sports podcasts and they were talking about, is this the return of the bagman? Is this, I know one that had me really interested, and I know you wanted to talk about, and you had lots of thoughts on, which I'm more than happy to hear because I just know you have the thoughts on them. Schools that in like the Big East that don't have football, that can throw all their money at basketball. Go, floor is yours, bud. Floor is yours.
I was gonna say, I kind of talk about those in reverse order. I think it's worth quickly visiting something I mentioned in passing at the top, the broader changes to NIL and what it is now, and at least what the House settlement would like it to look like going forward. In the last 4 years, we've basically seen NIL deals become an unregulated enterprise for all intents and purposes. It theoretically was not supposed to be pay for play, but I don't think any college sports fan who's at least vaguely aware of NIL and how it's functioned these last few years would argue that it hasn't just been entirely pay for play and how it's functioned. The House settlement at least attempts to address this by still allowing athletes to make third-party NIL deals, but those athletes will now be required to report any NIL deal with a value of at least $600 to NIL Go, which is a new clearinghouse run by the Big Four accounting firm Deloitte, whose job here is to see that this payment is market value and for actual legitimate business services rendered. Essentially, this is an attempt to stop what's been going on these past 4 years where it's been blatant pay for play. This has been very tricky for me to say, Bobby, clearly, by the schools with the deepest pockets. Like you said, I think that's a good chance it's going to be a return of the bagman here. It's not any way that I could look at this and not see how, we'll call them, these shortfalls get made up by extra legal payments, which is I think the nicest way. The kind of under the table paying of players that was quite common before 2020. I think there's no way this doesn't become at least like a little more common again, even as paying players out in the open has become fairly common. And I don't want to dive into it beyond this acknowledgement because it definitely needs to be acknowledged. But I think both spectrums of the argument annoy me. The people who are still entirely too precious about young people making money, but also the other end of the spectrum, the people who are just like giddy about seeing college sports burn, which maybe would have described me 4 or 5 years ago, but does it now, I think, as my views on this have evolved, and just seeing college sports consumed by a few of the most moneyed sharks, which I don't think is something most of us want to see. Most of us who love college sports, even if like emphatically, this is not me being like, oh, we need to go back to how it was 10 years ago. Like, no, that was also fucked, but just be like, yeah, just like let this cheerleading while like bagman stuff is happening. I think it's been very blackpilling for me, to use like a young person's term here, but
you're so cool.
Yeah, right. Bobby, do you know what makes me, I think, the most cynical about anything really changing when it comes to NIL, even with the House settlement here being agreed upon?
Can I make one guess?
I don't think you're gonna get this. I think because I was excited to talk about this. I don't think you're gonna get this, but you know what? If you do, hit me.
The fact that the NCAA is overseeing it.
That's a good one, and not even one I disagree with. But this is a bigger picture thing. Firstly, are you familiar with the name Cody Campbell?
Sounds familiar. Yes.
If anyone listening isn't, he's a West Texas.
He's the tech guy, right?
Tech guy. Yep. West Texas oil billionaire, Tech's chairman of the board of regents, played for Mike Leach there in the early aughts, about 5-6 years older than us, give or take. His backstory really isn't that important for my purposes here, but like you said, big high dollar donor to Red Raider Athletics, who specifically flexed some of their dollar muscle and bringing in an enormous, highly rated football transfer class, and also Nigeri Kennedy, a really, really good softball pitcher who led them to the national title game, helped them keep around All-American men's basketball player Jacob Toppin as well. No one out there, I think, is doing a better job of understanding, like Campbell and Tex Money people have, that there's no better bang for your buck investment if you're a high dollar kind of donor than the Olympic sports, because he's essentially invested 2 or 3 good football players, or him and also their money people. I don't want to put it all on him, or not all on him. They essentially invested 2 or 3 good football players worth of money into softball and made the title game in year 1, which isn't the only example of Tech becoming quite good in an Olympic sport, but maybe the most extreme one. Campbell's also written some good stuff about how American college athletic departments, forsaking everything but the 2 most profitable sports, would be really handicapping our ability to be, one of the premier, Olympic programs come that time every 4 years. And I would say anyone who considers himself a proud American like I am should want the UFC to still remain very, very good at that, and getting rid of the Olympic sports here, shuttering them largely, I think, handicaps that. But my meandering point here is that Campbell, somebody who's very knowledgeable about what's going on in college sports legislation, who very much has the literal ears of this current presidential administration, Bobby, he just placed a big and fairly public bet that nothing will fundamentally change when it comes to how college players are compensated. And what is that, you might ask? You probably saw 4th of July, they have 5-star offensive lineman Felix Ojo from DFW commit to Texas Tech, and shortly after his commitment, we saw reporting that he was slated to get a pretty hefty compensation package. Probably not one that would surprise me in this era for a truly elite recruit, but a lot of money. And even for an elite recruit, I doubt it would be the amount of money that would be allowed over the table in the new House settlement. And it did come out later that Tech had a package planned if a more stringent set of rules here actually gets enforced. But Bobby, I don't think it's a coincidence that the first and most prominent numbers that came out here were the big numbers that I believe Texas Tech still expects to pay this elite recruit. I mean, Tech's going to be ready for all realities here, but it's apparent which one they think is going to be the one that actually happens here in the future of college sports. And I think if you want to predict the future in any space, whether that's college athletics or a specific industry, in a non-sports world, you have to look at how the big players in the market are behaving. And one of the biggest ones in our state and in the same conference is putting out pretty fucking clear signals that they don't buy House is going to be changing their operation meaningfully. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying there. I think for me, you're exactly right about that deal, right? It was, if I recall, tell me if I'm wrong, 3 years, 5.1 million.
That sounds right. Yeah, I didn't put my notes, but yeah, somewhere about there.
Which is like an insane number. So the question becomes, and if you notice, I don't know if you noticed this, but on their release for it, like when they announced it, when the deal was done, it was sent as a revenue sharing deal. It was not like an NIL deal or anything like that. They made sure they called it a revenue sharing deal. So I think you're right that does kind of feel like nothing's going to change, but something almost has to change. So I think the question for me is not, will something change? Because I do believe something is going to change. It's hard for it not to, right? The question is, for me, the question I'm interested in finding out is, what does the change look like? Because right now, I think all of us kind of think there's a $20 million and $20.5 million salary cap, almost, you could say, on an entire athletic department. But then you see a guy sign for 1.7 and you're like, that's a tenth of your budget for your whole thing. Like, how are they making that work? And I think
even for an elite recruit, there's no way you're going to devote like 1.7 million divided by 20.5 over a year to one football player. Just no way.
And not a quarterback.
Yeah.
And so
offensive tackle, very critical position, but you're not going to have that much of the budget be just one football player.
Yeah, so it is. I think there will be change. You are right that this shows that the big player doesn't think it's going to change much, but I'm curious about how they're going to make that work. Right? I think the big dogs always are the ones to take the first step, and everyone kind of sits around and waits to see how they get around that. Do you do a bunch of, it's $600 before it goes to the clearinghouse? Do you tell your running back who's getting, $200,000 that, like, hey man, we're getting every business in do we start to see shell companies from them, and it's like, oh no, here's this company that we do and he's going to do 2 commercials for us, and like, how are teams going to beat it? Because teams are going to try and beat the system.
Oh yeah.
How do they try to beat the system? I don't know if it's Bagman, and if the NCAA was smart, which is a huge reach, the punishment if they find out you have a Bagman under house should be super severe. Super severe. Just because at least the first couple you have to, it can't be a slap on the wrist, or teams are going to continue to use the Bagman.
No, I agree. Maybe maybe the answer is a bigger salary cap. And also, how much can they actually enforce? Like a shell corporation, can they say, no, this doesn't seem like in the up and up? What power do they have to actually stop them?
Yeah.
Like, what power does the NCAA have here? These are all like big open-ended questions that it's not the direct purview of this case. So the case can't say, the case can't consider every hypothetical here, because then it would literally never get settled. Then we'd be just in mediation until the sun turns into a lump of coal.
Yeah, and I think there's other aspects of the house settlement and the payouts that it's going to get interesting. Title IX, what does that look like going forward? I mean, I think we can all agree that more money's going to be going to men's sports than women's sports. What does it look like, right, going forward? How many Title IX challenges? I'm super fascinated by it. I anything I can get my hands on about the house.
You have a presidential administration that's a lot like, I'm not saying this is a value judgment out of direction. You have a presidential administration that is less sympathetic to Title IX than the last one, which affects willingness to go to court. That again, not saying it as a good, bad, or indifferent, just like affects like who's willing to challenge what and what they think the expected result will be once they get in front of the right judge, or once the executive branch decides to weigh in.
Yeah, it's just, the whole thing is just very eye-opening, and it's, schools are never going to follow the rules to the letter of the law. It's just never going to happen. So I think going forward, how do they break the law is going to be the interesting conversation and things that are going to play out. I think NIL is a prime example of it. I think we all thought that it was going to be kind of kitschy commercials of players doing commercials for a AC company that's based in the city that they're in, that kind of makes everyone laugh, and they get paid $200, or they are allowed to go to, I was just at a card show this past weekend. They're allowed to go to that and sign. You never see anyone signing anything and getting paid for it. That's kind of what we thought. We thought the Manziels, where he was getting, envelopes of money for his signature, we thought that was going to be more like what we saw. And it just hasn't. I think you said it perfectly. It's very much been pay to play. And I think when the NCAA created their rules, I think that's what they were trying to avoid. But as the NCAA does, the schools tried to find a way to avoid the rules. The NCAA loves to think that things are black and white, and the teams live in the gray.
And also they got dragged to court a bunch of times by, I think, the least scrupulous teams trying to, get around that. Like, okay, like you can't, them saying, well, you can't give Nico Iamaleava this NIL deal before he comes here. Can't give him a multi-year one. Tennessee takes him to court. Voila. They can give that deal to him, though it didn't, I guess, work out great for Tennessee in the end here. That's what this is going to end up being, just like cascading lawsuits as a result of this. Someone's going to find something they don't like. Someone's going to get an NIL deal not approved and either take the NCAA to court over it, or go to the bagman and in some way circumvent it. I wanted to at least acknowledge one of the things you mentioned earlier, something that directly affects U of H as a current elite men's basketball program, is that potential competitive imbalance from the house settlement, between athletic programs that do and don't field major college football programs, because you have big examples in the don't category. Some of the better Big East programs, St. John's most recently has become a big dollar team again, but you also have UConn, Creighton, Villanova, Marquette, just to name a handful. And I realize out of that short list, UConn does have a D1 FBS football program that they seem like they're at least trying to be decent in, but those schools don't have the handicap of at least 2/3 and often quite higher percentage of the budget from the House settlement going into football. I mean, as we've said here a bunch of times, anyone with a brain cell knows that U of H is going to be giving Kelvin Sampson more than the average percentages among the P4 football schools. But I don't think either of us have seen a satisfactory explanation as to, how the opted-in Big East programs don't now have a massive advantage of being able to throw at least 25-30% more, probably more than that number, of their house dollars to men's and women's basketball because they don't have a football team taking the majority or nearly all of that metaphorical house revenue pie. Not to mention, those big names there also will have healthy traditional donor and third-party NIL cash flows on top of this now allowed house money. I mean, just use a women's basketball example. South Carolina has supported Dawn Staley in their elite women's basketball program institutionally as well as any school out there. How will they not be at least somewhat disadvantaged now against, say, UConn, who can devote a much larger percentage of their house money to women's basketball than an SEC athletic department that needs to make sure their ascendant SEC football program doesn't fall way behind its competitors? It's not me here saying that South Carolina is going to stop being women's basketball power or that we'll never see schools in the power football conferences be good in basketball again. I think it's just a pretty big unanswered question from the settlement. And I don't know the solution because there shouldn't be mandates on how opted in schools to choose to spend this money. I think it would be a non-starter on every level. So how do you fix it?
I think you have to figure out the problem exactly and see how bad the problem is before you can come up with ideas on how to solve it in this case. I also think that there are people who get paid a lot more money than you and I to fix it. I think it's a severe problem. I think there's something to be said that, like you said, what stops, St. John's and we're talking the high end of the Big East. What about everyone in the Big East is pretty good, but like
DePaul is not good.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. What stops DePaul from doing it besides not having the money to do it? But if I told you DePaul could put $10 million towards basketball, you'd be like, well, yeah, okay. And that's double what I projected U of H is going to have. At some point, you have to kind of look and go, well, this is going to be a problem. And again, that's why this whole thing is kind of interesting. It's kind of exciting, but it's all in who, I think, who has the money and who can spend it. I don't know. One of the things I'd be curious about is what if somebody like, I know UTEP may not have the money, but I just saw their logo. So let's just think UTEP has $20.5 million. And if they were like, you know what, we're going all in on men's golf. What's to stop that? And they're throwing 21 mil and that's just a crazy idea. Good for them, win the national title. But at some point when a school is spending X amount of dollars on a sport, it becomes a little unfair.
No doubt.
It's like the Yankees in baseball in the early 2000s. They just bought everybody. It was like, well.
But that's also kind of happening now. I mean, that's also happening now.
Well, yeah, with the Dodgers.
But also with NIL. There are programs functionally doing that now, just with a different framework.
Yeah, absolutely. The rich ones are going to get, to your point, an NIL deal at DePaul. You can, if you have a $10 million donor, you can have him split it up however you want to, or anything like that. So, yeah, it's a new era for college sports for sure.
No doubt. And I know I've said more negative things than positive about the House settlement. I do think the intentions of the House settlement are good. Allowing schools to directly compensate players finally is a strong net positive, and at least making attempts to keep the sport from further careening into an unchecked Wild West with the biggest schools just nakedly buying the best rosters with no controls. I think it's a good and noble idea, though, as we've both said now a fair amount. Pretty cynical that this settlement and the new attempts at controls will actually fundamentally change this reality. And there are still things we've talked about that the settlement hasn't answered or can't answer because it doesn't deal with issues specific to this case. basically I'm back to my initial reaction I had right after the house settlement was finalized, that Bobby, the big winners here, as they often are in this life, are going to be lawyers and billable hours.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The lawyers will always win. Who who was it? There's a guy who I can't remember who it is on Twitter, but he would be like, there will be lawyers or something like that. That's what he would always respond. Andrew Brent, whatever he is from he used to be the Packers GM. He would always say it.
Oh yeah, the sports business guy. I can picture.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah,
I can picture his Abby in my mind. Still glad we had the time here during the offseason to discuss this topic, because obviously in the middle of the season, just devoting 30-something minutes to talk about off-field sports legislation might not be, I think, feasible, but I'm glad we had the time to do so here.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting to see how teams handle it. I'm fascinated about how U of H handles it. I would love to know. I would love to sit in the discussions about how they're going to divvy up the money, because, I'm glad we got Nunez in this past year. He seems to be doing a good job and has some pretty good ideas on things. So I fully trust his decisions. I'm sure he's making some really tough calls, and that's why he gets paid the big bucks.
So before Bobby and I go, real quick here, as I alluded to at the top, we're going to be doing a patron exclusive episode where we talk about the football transfer portal class, kicking around a lot of topics related to that. So here's a little taste of what you could be getting on the patron feed.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Like, who's somebody who, yes, we would love to see him do something this year, but I think he's more of a roster building. You want to see him, you want to see this player, whoever it is, really get the feel for a jump up in competition, maybe, or they were injured last year, see how they come back, and then next year they fully get back, right? Things like ACL, stuff like that can really hold guys back. In that first year, there's a lot of trust and injuries, trusting your body that it's not going to snap again. You see that a lot with a lot of athletes. So I think you interpreted it perfectly. I think for me, one that really kind of identifies this for me is going to be Harvey Broussard from Ulala. He played a decent amount at Ulala. You saw him second at Ulala with in yards per reception, so he's got a little bit of a deep threat there. But I don't know if what he's going to look like on the field right away. Is he going to produce that? He's stepping up pretty big in competition, going from the Sun Belt up to the Big 12. We've seen that work, obviously, receivers going up to a higher level, but also it's bigger physical. It feels a lot like that jump from high school. You always see like high school receivers, then they jump up to college. They usually struggle that first year in that jump up in competition because of the size and the speed. I do wonder if that's going to happen here in year one with Harvey Broussard. I could see him making a small impact this year, getting on the field, making some receptions, and we kind of look and we're like, oh, he had 2 receptions, that's pretty good. But then next year, 2026, really opening up, he's got those 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. Sam, who did you have here?
My answer for this is Zelmar Vetter, the cornerback out of Sac State. Not that he's not going to get on the field in 2025. I'd be surprised if he's anything less than a rotation cornerback for the Cougar defense this year. But he's making a big jump up from Division I FCS football to a Big 12 program. Not an impossible jump. We have multiple examples just on the defense of guys making a jump very much like that one to U of H and doing notably well here. But I picked Vetter because the quarterback position group already has a pretty established number 1 going into the coming season in Latrell McCutcheon, senior, one of your top returnees to the defense. I think Vetter is going to have some growing pains against a higher level of competition as one of U of H's rotation cores in 2025, but I also think he's going to show off at times why he was one of the highest rated incoming transfers by the various recruiting services. And I think just flashing the God-given ability that you see from 6'3" cornerbacks who've already played a fairly good amount of college football. I think the blueprint here, even though these 2 guys play very different positions on defense, is Carlos Allen. And what you saw him do as an interior defensive lineman on last year's defense, now coming back into 2025 as a frontline guy, I believe Vetter's story going into the next offseason will be a pretty similar one to Allen's currently.
Yeah, I love that comp. I think that's a great in talking about the development and doing that jump. Can I give you one more?
Yeah, man.
I'm just interested in the thing that catches my eye is the schools that Dalton Merriman has been at in his journey through, right? Starting at Tarleton. Then you drop down a level and go to JUCO. Then you jump up to Texas Tech, and now you're at Houston. It's very interesting to see how he's kind of progressed and worked his way through. It seems like a guy who's very aware of his talent level, what he should be doing, where he should be at. Wanted to come back home closer to Houston in being from Montgomery. So just one that, again, may not answer the question here of will he make an impact just next year more than this year. Just a very interesting journey as we talked a little bit about stepping up a little bit.
Yeah, multiple years of eligibility left, I think.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you have made your way over to patreon.com/shpodcast and decided you wanted to hear that full breakdown of our transfer, our thoughts on our football transfer class. So if you did enjoy it, again, at patreon.com/shpodcast. You can also send us any feedback on Patreon if you are a Patreon member. You can also email us at shpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media at shpodcast on Twitter, or you can find us on Blue Sky podcast.bsky.social. For anyone who hasn't been listening for a long time, that is podcast PAWDCAST. If you just go to podcast.bsky.social, I don't know where you end up, but make sure you do pod with the W and the D. Sam, I think that's it. Did I touch everything in the outro?
I think you did.
All right. Well, what do we always say, buddy?
Go Cougs.
All right. Go Cougs! Let's go!